So today we're going to be talking about service-connected disability benefits. What are they and what should you do if they get worse during the COVID-19 pandemic? So we hope you'll join us for that discussion. Hi, and welcome back to Hill and Ponton's VA Disability blog. I am Natalia Joffrey, the company COO.
And I'm attorney Melanie Williams.
Hi, Melanie.
Hi.
So Melanie and I are going to keep doing our little blogs here remotely during this pandemic, and we're going to touch on the pandemic today. What happens if you're applying for benefits and while this is all going on, and what if you're scheduled for a CMP exam? What are you supposed to do during COVID? But I think we need to go back to some of the basics, Melanie. And then once we've addressed the basics of applying for service-connected disability benefits, then we can get into what do you do during this very specific time. So I guess my first question for you is, what is service-connected disability?
Yes. So if you have a condition, an injury, a diagnosis that you suspect is due to service, due to something that happened to you in service, you can get compensated for that. You get compensation benefits. So you apply for service connection and you have to prove three things. The first is that you have an actual condition, a diagnosis of some kind. The second is that there was something that happened to you in service. And the third is that thing that happened in service caused the condition that you have. And that third element is called a nexus. That's usually provided by a doctor. And so once you're able to establish those three things, the VA will grant service connection. And then according to how you're rated, which we're going to talk about that in a second, they give you monthly benefits for that.
How do they decide that? How do they decide what your rating should be?
Yes. So there are each condition has its own set of what's called diagnostic criteria. So basically, there are ratings from 0 to 100 in increments of 10, and they are percentages. Each percentage is corresponds with a monthly benefit amount, and we'll go over it in a minute what the amount is for each of those percentages. But so in order to get a percentage, it's based on the severity of your condition. So the VA has a whole list. It's called the Schedule of Rating Disabilities. And basically they have every condition you can think of, and they list out criteria based on the severity of these conditions, and it corresponds with a percentage. So for example, if you have a mental condition, almost all mental conditions are rated about the same, where 0 means it doesn't affect you, 10% is it sort of affects you, and it kind of goes down 30%, 50%, 70%, 100%. And so depending on the severity, you're assigned a percentage. That percentage means what monthly benefits you'll get.
And just so that I'm clear, so let's say with tinnitus, you get 10%, and you get a certain amount for that condition. And let's say you get 10% for a back condition. Now, not one equal, not one in addition to each other, but just say 10% for tinnitus, or, Joe has 10% for a back condition. The monetary value that they're going to receive for 10% is the same, correct? It's not based on the actual condition, but based on the percentage of rating.
Yes. And that is a good question and brings up another point where, what if you have multiple service-connected conditions with different percentages? What does the VA do there? What's your percentage? So what they do is they don't add up each of the percentages, they combine them, and they have their own formula for combining them. We call it VA math because it doesn't necessarily make sense. But
you go to school forever and not understand it in terms of logical thinking, right?
Exactly, yes. So we actually have a calculator on our website where you can go in and you can plug in each of your percentages, and it calculates for you what your overall combined percentage would be. Because it's very difficult to try and calculate it on your own. So if you have different percentages, you can use that calculator to figure out what your overall combined percentage is. So that overall combined rating, that's the percentage that they'll use to determine what your monthly amount is.
And I know that you explained this to us once before, and I thought it was so helpful. For me, it was such an enigma to understand the VA math and how they calculated percentages. But you gave us a good example once before, and maybe you can reiterate that for us now, where you basically explained regarding, it's a percentage of the remaining body. And so they take the percentage from there. Can you reiterate that kind of explanation?
Yeah. So the way that they do it is they look at it as how much does the disability affect your overall level of functioning. So let's say a normal person has, and I don't mean to say a normal person, but just, anyone that doesn't have disabilities has 100% ability to function. If you have a condition that impairs your ability by 50%, that would be the first rating. So, your first percentage is 50%. If you have another condition, that rating isn't going to be added to the 50%. They take the remaining 50 and apply what that percentage would be. So I'm not sure if that's making a whole lot of sense, but basically they take the remaining amount of your ability to function, again, in
Mhm.
these like hypothetical percentages, as if you
Yes.
can actually calculate a number for a person's ability to function. But that's kind of the
Right.
way that they calculate it, is they take the remaining ability to function and then determining how that condition would affect that remaining ability,
Yeah,
if
yeah.
that makes
That's
sense.
it does make sense. I mean, for in a world where nothing makes sense, that makes as much sense as it could.
Yeah.
So why don't you give us an idea of what we're looking at monetarily? Because I know that I've heard some of these numbers and they've blown my mind. So can you go down the list of like what you get for 10% versus 100 and everything in between?
Yes. So obviously, 0%, you don't get anything. However, if you have multiple service connected conditions at 0%, they'll pay you at a rate of 10%. Now, the 10% rating is $142.29. So that's the amount that you'll be getting each month. If you have a
Mhm.
20% rating, it's $281.27. Now, these amounts that I'm going through are the amounts for this year, for 2020.
Okay.
Each year they change because they adjust it slightly based on what they estimate the cost of living to be.
Mhm.
So each year is going to have its own different amounts. So I'm just going through the ones for
Specifics.
this year.
Mhm.
Now, 30% for just a veteran is $435.69. At 30% is where you can start getting benefits for your dependents. So whether you have a spouse, whether you have children, and each of those is going to have um, its own amount. So whether you have a spouse and no children, or a children, each one corresponds to its own amount.
Mhm.
If you have a 40% rating, that's $627.61. A 50% rating is $893.43. A 60% rating is $1,131.68. So we start getting a little bit higher here.
Yeah.
A 70% rating is going to be $1,426.17.
Okay.
And again, these are just for the veteran alone. This isn't counting any dependents.
Mhm.
An 80% rating is $1,657.80.
Mhm.
A 90% rating is $1,862.96.
Okay.
Now, here's the interesting one. When you get to 100%, it jumps to $3,106.04. So there's a
Whoa.
big difference between a 90% rating and a 100% rating.
That's huge. It's you're going through these amounts and you start seeing, well, between 30 and 40, it's a couple $100. And then all of a sudden you start getting into the 50, 70, 80 range. It's about a difference of almost $300. And so you're like, well, that kind of makes sense. But to go from 90 at 1862 to 100%, 3,100, I mean, that's an enormous difference.
Yes.
So it for these veterans, and I know we see this all the time, they're at 90% and it's like, I don't want to deal with the VA. I'm content. I'm okay. I feel like I'm being taken care of. Yet they have this multitude of problems because otherwise they wouldn't be getting 90%. And all of it, their lives are so affected, and I don't think that they realize that by getting that increased 10%, to 100, that it's going to make such an enormous difference in
Yes.
their livelihood. Because I mean,
Right.
let's face it, I think all, most, but I would say close to all of our clients, this is their sole source of income. I mean, this is what they're using to live off of.
Yeah.
So if you can get a $1,200 raise, that's a pretty significant jump. 12,
Right.
$1,400. Yeah. Yeah, that's crazy.
Yes.
And is there any explanation for that, or that's just the number they put out there?
I honestly have no idea how they came up with these numbers. That's just kind of that it is what it is.
It is what it is.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's great. So why don't you, now that we told you what these amounts can be, can you walk everyone through a little bit of what the process is like? Because I do think that a lot of veterans don't go through with this or don't appeal the decisions that they receive because sometimes out of fear, just fear of the unknown, in terms of or not really wanting to deal with the VA, fear of losing their benefits. There's a lot of concerns that go into pursuing benefits. But I guess if you could maybe just walk us all through the basics of filing a claim and the basic process.
Yes. So you file a claim for service connection, assuming you're able to meet all of the elements and they grant service connection. They will assign you the rating, like we talked about. They'll assign you an effective date, which usually goes back to the date of the claim. Because by the time they make the decision, it's usually several months after the claim, they basically say, this is what we owe you from the time that you filed the claim until they made the decision. So that's what the effective date is for. So once you file the claim, you get your decision. If you're happy with it, great, you're done. You start getting your monthly benefits, you're fine. But let's say they either deny you, or what happens in a lot of cases, and what we're talking about today is the rating. You feel like your rating wasn't correct. In that case, you can appeal your decision. And there are two different systems that we'll kind of go into in detail, because you may have heard terms like AMA and legacy, so we'll go through that. But basically, if you're not happy with your decision, you appeal it. They issue another decision, and you can keep fighting until you feel that you are getting what you're entitled to. And if not, if you don't appeal, and if you're not happy with it, you may be missing out on some benefits that you can be getting. So to go into a little more detail, if you file a claim after February 2019, so anytime from last year to this year, if you file a claim right now, you are under this new system called AMA. It stands for the Appeals Modernization Act.
Mhm.
Basically, what happened, so the previous system is called legacy. The way that system worked was you would file a claim, they make a decision. If you're not happy with it, you appeal it. You file what's called a notice of disagreement. Then they issue another decision. If it's still a denial, it's called a statement of the case. In
Mhm.
between those periods could be anywhere from a year to 18 months for them to make a decision, which is obviously a very long time for a veteran to have to wait to receive their benefits.
Yeah.
Then once you get that statement of the case and you want to appeal it even higher to the Board of Veterans Appeals because you're still not happy with it, you could be waiting another 3 years to get a decision.
Wow.
So Congress basically said, we're going to just completely do, an overhaul of the whole appeal system to try to get things moving faster. And so far, we have seen it moving faster.
Good.
So under the AMA, you file a claim, they issue a decision. If you're not happy with it, you have three options to appeal. The first is called the supplemental claim lane. So basically where you want to submit new evidence. The evidence has to be new, so something they didn't have before and relevant to your claim. They'll consider that and make a new decision. Your second
Mhm.
option is what's called higher level review. So basically your claim, you're good to go. You've submitted all of your evidence. You don't want to submit anything else. You just want someone new at the VA to issue a decision. Your
Mhm.
third option is appealing it up to the BVA, to have basically a higher level of appeals system, this time it's an actual veterans law judge that's considering your claim.
Mhm.
So for the first two options, the supplemental claim and the higher level review, they're taking anywhere from 2 to 6 months to make a decision, which is obviously much better than, the 18 months in the previous system.
Right.
If you appeal to the BVA, the fastest that you'll get a decision is 1 year.
Mhm.
So that's still a lot, but it's better than, 3 years that you in the previous system. Um,
The best in the worst of worlds, but yes.
yeah.
Uh-huh.
If you request a hearing, there's no estimate for how long it'll take. That's the longest lane or avenue that you can choose. So,
Mhm.
just kind of want to warn veterans out there. A lot of veterans really want to request a hearing. Just keep in mind, you'll be waiting longer than anybody else,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that's the basic overview of the appeal system. I
Yeah.
know it sounds like a lot, but basically you take it one step at a time to figure out, until you get to exactly what you think you should be receiving from the VA.
And I think that the difference here is, in our office, and I know with you, when you take your cases, um, people sometimes get overwhelmed. They hear all of this and they're like, oh my God, that's a lot,
Yeah,
all of this time, all of these appeals, all of these decisions. And the beauty of it is you're walking them through that. You're doing
absolutely.
the work, you're keeping it going, you're advising, should we appeal? Should we not? What will we base the appeal on? I mean, these are decisions that you're assisting the veteran in making, and then you're doing the work for them.
Right.
So it sounds overwhelming, but I do think that this is one of those circumstances where when you have representation, it makes a huge difference. I mean, you can be brought up to date because what I've seen, and obviously I know that this has been your experience, but even looking at it from the outside, like from when I did Social Security disability cases, you know, our clients were routinely awarded very low ratings. I mean, ratings that were obviously much lower than what they should have been, considering the veterans' disabilities and how they were impacting their lives. So would you say that that is what you find as well? That for the most part, normally the initially awarded rating is inaccurate, and they could probably qualify for a lot more.
Yes, absolutely, 1,000%. And what I see so often is veterans get so discouraged, and they want to give up. But I tell veterans every day, we will keep fighting with you. It requires patience, but in the end, you know, getting what you are entitled to is worth it.
Yeah.
So, just keeping in mind that they may tell you no over and over again, but that doesn't mean it's going to be a no forever.
Right. And
Um,
they're getting paid in the meantime. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, you're fine.
Mhm.
Yeah. So if they, are service connected and they get that low rating, they are receiving that monthly amount in the meantime. And then something that we'll talk about as well is, ultimately, once you do get the rating that you're entitled to, you'll get back pay. So, from the date of your claim, from your effective date, you'll get everything that you would have been entitled to in the meantime. So that is also something to look forward to.
Yeah, and I think that that's the fear sometimes. I don't want them to even question this, reevaluate this. I got my 10% or I got my 20%. I can somehow manage to live off of this, or I just need a little bit to get by. And the reality is you can keep receiving that benefit and still appeal for more.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. Um, you told us about the difference between legacy versus AMA. Um, so if the VA grants you service connection and you're not pleased with the rating, you can appeal for a higher rating, right? That's
Yes.
what we were just discussing.
Yes.
Um, what Walk us through what should a veteran do if they were rated properly years ago, but now their condition has gotten worse? What should they consider?
Yes. So, if the VA issues that decision and you're happy with it, well, basically you have 1 year from the date of that decision to file an appeal. If you don't file an appeal, the claim closes. So
Mhm.
you're happy with it, you don't file an appeal, good. Those are the benefits that you're receiving from here on out. But
Mhm.
if your condition does get worse later on, you can file a claim for an increased rating. And so at that point, they'll be evaluating what the severity of your condition is at that time to see if you're
Mhm.
entitled to a higher rating.
Mhm.
So usually, because the claim it was a previous claim, so you're not filing a brand new claim for a new condition. You'll want to submit new evidence with that claim to show
Mhm.
them that your condition has gotten worse. It has
Mhm.
increased in severity, and so you're entitled to a higher rating because of that.
Okay. And there's a how long do they have to appeal?
So once they issue that new decision, it's 1 year. So it's usually always going to be 1 year from the date of the decision to file an appeal. Um,
Okay.
but so keep in mind, you filed that initial claim, they granted service connection, you were happy with it, that claim closed. So you file a new claim for an increased rating. Once
Mhm.
they increase that rating, the effective date is going to be the date of the new claim. So
Okay.
so you'll only get back pay from the date of that claim for the increased rating specifically.
Okay. Is there any benefit to waiting within that year? Like, what do you recommend? Do you recommend that they appeal right away, depending on their condition, or should they wait? What do you recommend?
So always act right away. So if you notice that your condition is worsening,
Mhm.
and you submit evidence to the VA that your condition is worsened, and you file a claim within that 1 year,
Mhm.
then your effective date will actually go back 1 year prior to the date that you filed a claim.
Mhm.
And so, because the earlier your effective date is, the more back pay you'll get. You always want to file your claim as soon as possible. As soon as you know that, my condition is worse, my pain has increased, whatever the case may be, file the claim, go see your doctor, get it in your medical records that your pain has increased, whatever the case may be. You'll want there to be documentation of that. And then once they issue a decision, and if you're still not happy with that rating, if it's still not what you think you're entitled to, again, you have 1 year to appeal. And like we said, you should appeal. You should keep fighting until you get what you think you're owed.
Is there any risk involved in applying for an increased rating?
Unfortunately, yes. So when you file a claim for an increased rating, they are likely going to send you for a CMP exam, a compensation and pension examination. So that's when someone at the VA will evaluate you and your condition and determine the severity. If
Mhm.
they find that instead of your severity having gotten worse, it's actually gotten better, in that case, they can propose to reduce your rating.
Okay.
Same thing if you send records, but the records actually say, you've gotten better, the pain is not as often or as severe, um, they might decrease your rating instead of making it higher.
I think that now that you mentioned that, Melanie, it's important to note that this is why it's so important when you walk into your doctor's office and they ask you, "How are you doing?" They're not being polite. They're asking you, "How are you doing?" So when you reply, "Great, good, whatever," they're putting that down. So,
Yes.
if you feel awful most of the time, what should be coming out of your mouth is not good. Well, why? Hopefully the follow-up question will be, well, why is that?
Right.
Well, I'm still having shortness of breath, I'm still tired all the time, I have to stay in bed until noon, my wife has to do everything for me. Whatever the situation may be, it takes me 30 minutes to roll out of bed because the neuropathy in my feet is so bad. Like, this is, oh, I think that what I see many times when I read medical records is I'm astonished. I'll see this laundry list of conditions, this laundry list of side effects from medications. The veteran is just riddled with all of these problems. And then the case note is like this big. And it's like, veterans doing fine, compliance with meds fine. You know, what they put something, it's not reacting well, but tolerating medication well. Like everything's hunky dory,
Yeah.
because how are you doing? Well, I'm good. Well, then you're good. I mean, they're not going to, keep delving into, well, are you really good? Well, how are you feeling today versus yesterday? They're not going to do that. you
Right.
know?
And
So
even if you are having a good day that day, you want to think about your worst days, think about the days where you
yeah,
actually are struggling. And that's what you should talk about, because just because you're having a good day when you go see the doctor doesn't mean that that's your everyday.
yeah. And by no means should you make stuff up or exaggerate your symptoms. You need to talk about what your reality is, this is helping my blood pressure, but I'm nauseous all the time from the medication, or I'm dizzy, or my wife had to drive me today because I get disoriented when I'm driving, or I start falling asleep at the wheel, whatever. I think that one of the mistakes that we commonly see is that there's not enough discussion of what your complaints and problems are when you go to these medical encounters. And at the end of the day, that's what's being taken into consideration when the VA is making their decisions, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
for any decision, wouldn't you
Right.
say, to award benefits and for increased ratings?
Absolutely, yeah. The doctor is not going to advocate for you, so you have to stand up and speak for yourself,
Right, right.
because the VA is going to be determining, based on what the doctor says. So you have to make sure that the doctor knows everything that you are feeling and experiencing.
Yeah, yeah. Since we're talking about what it does help in terms of getting an increased rating, what evidence do you feel would be helpful for them to get that increased rating?
Yeah, so like we said, the doctor's records, treatment records, but also buddy statements. I know we've talked about those before, but having other people in your life, being able to speak to what it is that you go through on a daily basis is crucial, because a lot of times they see things that you don't. And even you writing it down in a statement, sometimes, you go to the doctor, but then you get home and remember all these other things that you didn't say.
Yeah.
So write it down, keep a journal, keep a diary. How often do you have your headaches? What do you feel whenever you go through, when you have to interact with people or go to the grocery store, and you have a panic attack. Writing down all of these things, and then submitting that to the VA is all helpful to show, the severity of your condition.
I love I used to love talking to veterans, especially when the spouse was present. And you ask these questions about like daily activities and personal hygiene and whatnot. And you always get the side eye look, from the spouse. So you'll say, any problems, taking care of yourself, and it was always like, no, I'm fine, everything's fine, whatever. And you always get that side eye look, and then the wife would be like, doesn't shower every day. I have to prompt him. And, on a good week, it's twice a week,
Right.
and if I didn't cook for him and if I didn't take him food on the TV tray, he wouldn't eat,
Mhm.
and he's tired all the time. Like all of a sudden you were getting all of this information. And that's why I think that the buddy statements are wonderful, because
Yes.
so that people understand, basically a buddy statement is almost like a witness statement, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes. Yeah. A lay statement is also what we call it. It's basically just someone else, in your life, relative, friend, writing down, their experience with you, basically.
Right.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's great. Will they have to go to a new CMP exam?
Most likely, yes. And so, when you file a claim for increased rating, they usually always, request a new CMP exam. If you don't show for the CMP exam, they will deny your claim. And so this is one of the things that we're dealing with right now, is because of COVID-19, because of this pandemic, not everything is happening in person. Even if it is, a veteran may not feel comfortable going. So what they're doing now, for the most part, they're doing, video evaluations, particularly for mental health. Usually that's just a dialogue between the veteran and the doctor. So
Mhm.
it could be through video, kind of like how we're doing now. If some exams do need to be in person, like if they're, evaluating the severity of your back and things like that, because they do range of motion examinations.
Mm.
So a lot of those exams are on hold right now. Or if they do set you for an in-person exam and you're not comfortable going, if you have those underlying conditions that, you're worried about your exposure to other people, I would definitely call the VA, let them know, mention specifically, COVID-19 and the coronavirus, that that's the reason why you're not comfortable going. And they won't penalize you for, or they shouldn't penalize you for not going. They should either try to accommodate you or reschedule for later. But that's kind of been, the biggest impact I think that we've seen with this whole pandemic and the VA is specifically these CMP exams that, each regional office is kind of handling it differently. So you'll want to call them because they might just send you a letter and say, hey, show up, this day, this time. So just make sure that you're calling and communicating with them and letting them know what your situation is, and figuring out what they can do to help you out.
I'm glad that you mentioned that you have to specify that it's due to coronavirus, COVID-19, whatever you want to call it. Because I know that in the past, we've really strongly advised if you could have a CMP exam, it's really important to make sure you keep that exam.
Yeah.
And, in the past, we've had a lot of veterans that due to depression and anxiety or PTSD symptoms or for an array of things, they really didn't want to go to these examinations. And so, they would always ask, do I really have to? I don't want to, so on and so forth. So when you're presenting your explanation for why you don't want to go to this in-person exam, you need to specify that. Don't
Yes.
right, don't go off on the tangent about your anxiety and your depression and how it's hard for you to get out of bed. You want to specify it's for this reason, it's due to COVID.
Yep.
Otherwise, then they could hold it against you if they think that it's due to something else.
Yes.
Right.
Right. Yeah. You always want to make sure you let them know, hey, I'm here. I'm willing to participate, but this is the reason why I can't, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah, 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 yeah. And I think that it's also this technology is very off-putting for people. We're in the new normal and we've all had to learn how to do new things. Even for me, we're now interviewing people remotely. We're doing these blogs remotely.
Yeah.
We never did these things remotely before. But I think it's important for the veteran to keep in mind that they have to act as if though the same way they would if they were in the office.
Mhm.
So once again, talk about your symptoms, talk about your complaints, talk about your concerns. Once again, from the time that camera comes on, it's how are you doing? Start talking about how you're really doing,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, yeah. And don't be embarrassed. That is something that I want to say to veterans too. A lot of times, I know things are hard to talk about, but keep in mind that at the end of the day, it might help you get more money, frankly.
Yeah,
Like if you're being honest about everything that you're going through, even if it's not comfortable to talk about, that could end up getting you the higher rating that you need.
yeah, yeah. Since we're talking about that, Melanie, I know that obviously we know it's possible to apply and to appeal for more. Is it difficult, or is it unlikely to be awarded a higher rating?
Not necessarily. It's going to depend on what the evidence shows. And I will say from personal experience, a lot of times the evidence is there and the VA still denies. But it's one of those things where you you know what your situation is, what your records say, what's in there. So that's when you keep fighting. It shouldn't be difficult. I wish it could just say, you know it's a piece of cake, but unfortunately they they kind of make it difficult for veterans, and that's why we're here.
Yeah. What should happen versus what does happen, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Um, but we do have the majority of our clients. I mean, they are, able to uh, eventually become successful with their claims.
Absolutely.
May be difficult, may take a long time, but it's a definite possibility.
Yeah.
Have you seen a impact on with COVID-19? Is it affecting people being approved or being denied? Any impact there on the decisions we're receiving for claimants in terms of acceptance or denial?
No. So, people are still filing claims like normal. You can still do that without a problem. And it's not affecting whether or not the VA is going to grant you. I don't think we've been seeing a slowdown in decisions either. I feel like they have been keeping up with that. Again, I think the only, hiccup has been the CMP exams, when they need an in-person exam and it's just kind of sitting there and it stalls. That's really been the only main delay. But besides that, thankfully, it hasn't really had an effect on the claims process and the success of claims.
Okay, great. Can you explain to everyone what is TDIU, also known as unemployability?
Yes. And the reason we call it TDIU, it stands for Total Disability Based on Individual Unemployability. So you might hear it as unemployability, you might hear it as IU. Basically, it's when if your combined ratings, so remember we talked about how, all those ratings will add up to, a different percentage. It may not be 100%, but you might still not be able to work because of your conditions. So you might be completely at a functional loss. You may not be able to function, to be able to maintain or get employment.
Mhm,
Um, but if your conditions don't add up to that 100%, there's this other avenue called IU. So basically, you would have to show, again, the severity of your conditions and all of that, and specifically how it affects your ability to work. So if you have been looking for jobs, or let's say you do work or you are working, but it's either part time or a lot of times veterans have jobs that they're only able to maintain for a short amount of time, a month here and there, a couple weeks here and there. That means you're not able to maintain substantially gainful employment.
mhm,
That's the key word the key phrase that we're looking for: substantially gainful employment.
mhm.
If you're not able to do that because of your service connected conditions, that means you're entitled to IU.
Okay, great, great. Well, this was really helpful information, Melanie. It's always a pleasure to talk to you,
You as
and
well.
hopefully we'll see you again soon and talk some more about some other interesting things.
Yes, thank you so much.
Thank y'all for joining us. And if you have any questions or want additional information, please feel free to visit our website or call our office.